Welcome to Implement This with Microsoft Business Solutions MVP Britta Rexted and co-host Matthew C. Anderson, where we have an insider's discussion around the things we consider when implementing Dynamics 365. In today's episode, sponsored by Kingswaysoft, Britta and I discuss Rollup Fields in Dynamics 365 and model-driven Power Apps. Kingswaysoft is a leading integration solution provider, offering software solutions that make data integration affordable and painlessly easy. Thousands of enterprise clients from over 70 countries and regions rely on Kingswaysoft to integrate data with various business systems in order to drive their business efficiency and fully leverage their information assets. Kingswaysoft is a leading provider of Microsoft Dynamics integration software, including Dynamics 365, CRM, AX, NAV, GP, SL, as well as many other applications. Check out their version 6 release of the SSIS prod, featuring 7 new components, including support for Azure Blob Storage, Google Sheets, and a new data profiler transformation component. We thank Kingswaysoft for their sponsorship, and now, on with the show. And now we're back with another episode of Implement This. Hi, Britta. How are you?
Good, Matt. How are you?
I am doing fantastically. Do you know why?
Why?
Because we have another listener question.
Awesome.
I love getting the listener questions in. So I will start by saying thank you to Bernie, who sent this one in. Bernie's question: is there a way to sum child entity fields without using a rollup field? Some calculation needs to be immediately done. Ah, yes, Bernie. Very good question. So I think for this one, I think we can discuss a couple of different things. I'd like to actually start by discussing rollup fields. They are newer in the platform, introduced a few versions back, but they're certainly newer compared to some of the other field types that we're used to. Maybe talk about their general fit, and then dig into some thoughts specifically around alternatives when they don't quite meet your needs.
Mm-hmm. It sounds good.
Cool.
This is one of those questions that I hear tale as old as time from Beauty and the Beast when it comes up, because I think as long as I've been in Dynamics, we've been at conferences asking this question. There's all different reasons why you need to calculate something off of a child record, whether it's counting those records or actually doing math on some value on the record itself. And then speed is a big deal. Reporting, I mean, it can have a really big impact. So as we know, rollup fields today, there's an hour delay on that, and that can have a really significant impact on your reporting. So, or even just user experience or other things. So right. Let's get into rollup fields if people aren't familiar with them. I feel like we need to level set there first. Yes.
So when we're looking at rollup fields, this is one of those types of things people have been asking for inside of Dynamics for such a long time. And it's one of those things, if you didn't know about it, it might have slipped in there without you really seeing it, because the place where it's defined is right in the field creation window. So in all the different options that are there, there's this new option set of whether it is a simple field,
which is the ones we've always known.
Yep.
Yeah.
A calculated field or a roll-up field. So choosing it to be a roll-up field in that case is where you're going to start to be able to get some of that aggregation.
And the reason for that is that we have all different. A roll-up field is really just a field that is you can roll up the values of something else. So, we think of that really commonly as like rolling up revenue or something like that. But actually, I more commonly use roll-up fields on dates.
Oh, okay.
I do a lot of rolling up of dates and also counting of things too.
Yeah.
So it doesn't just have to be adding all of the value of your opportunities underneath an account or something really obvious like that. So that's why we get into the very specific types, because if it's currency or it's a whole number or it's something else, then there's some that we just can't do. You don't have roll-up text fields.
Right.
Yeah.
So we do have several different types of aggregation, as you mentioned. So there's summing, counting, getting a minimum value, a maximum value, or an average value. So those are kind of the types of operations that can be done. And for any of these roll-up fields that are being created or configured here, there are 3 different components that are set up as part of that. So the first one is the source entity and whether or not a hierarchy should be used. So what is that related record type that you're going to be using in this roll-up aggregation? And then when it asks about the hierarchy, that is specifically the Microsoft Dynamics hierarchy that can be defined for kind of one per entity in that way. So you can create, a common one is like an account hierarchy, that specific hierarchy definition that's in there. So you can get not just the value of, say, opportunities for an account, but all of the related child opportunities for that account as well.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm. So then within the related entity, we have optional filters that we can put on there. So maybe we only want to look at deals over a certain amount, or maybe we want to look at deals that aren't owned by a system or a service account, or those types of filters that are in there. And those are added much in the same way as, say, the advanced find is used there.
Mm-hmm. But they are much simpler, so we don't get really dynamic controls there, and you can't leverage relationships in asking those questions either. So like we're accustomed, because of the advanced find, that our queries or conditions can be fairly related in all the different types of records we can use. And here it's pretty specific.
Yes.
It can filter, but there's some hidden gotchas in there.
Yeah, definitely. And then the last aspect of kind of creating one of these fields is the actual type of summary. So we mentioned what those different types are. That's where you have your count or sum or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
So, just thinking through a couple of examples, I mean, you mentioned it doesn't just have to be revenue. It could be dates. It could be a number of open cases for a customer. It could be, total value of opportunities, average deal size, associated with a user record.
Mm-hmm.
Who's your top dog salesperson?
Yeah, it's a good. I love it with dates. I use it all the time for, the ever popular last email sent,
yes,
or last appointment, or things like that. It's so easy. They're quick and easy and really nice for those good quick wins. Yeah.
So though when we set these up, you mentioned email. That makes me think of some of the considerations that are out there when you're looking at these. Like you can't use activity pointer or activity entity as as filters for it. So there are also some other kind of considerations that we have. I mean, what are some of those that come to mind for you as you're creating these?
Well, like you were just talking with activities, the implication for that is that we can't do last activity in one rollup. So you can get last task and last email and last appointment and last phone call. And that really chews up your rollup fields really fast. This is an area that we are limited. We only get 10 per entity, and those go really fast if you're not counting. And then we only get 100 in the whole system. And so if it's going to take 4 of your 10 rollup fields to just figure out what activities you've done recently, that can really add up pretty fast.
Yeah, absolutely. Another consideration, and this is an important one, is that when these are calculated in that rollup, it does it as an administrator that has access to be able to see all of the related records. It doesn't have kind of that sensibility of, oh, I'm a salesperson in this business unit, so I only know about, call it 50% of the opportunities that are out there. The others sit in another business unit. I would actually see if it's doing a roll-up of all opportunities, I'm going to see that total number across the entire organization. So having that type of thing in mind is important, because it might mean you have to throw some field security around who can see these roll-up fields that are out there if you're trying to keep some of that type of data close to the vest.
Yeah, we're so used to security context having our back that we don't usually have to think about things like that. But you're totally right. It does definitely kick in there. Something else I think is interesting, there's kind of some confusion, I think, about how workflows can interact with rollup fields. And they're not an event they're not a field that you could trigger for a change. So, for example, we have a lot of our simple fields that if that field changes, that can trigger workflows and other things to happen. And that doesn't apply with rollup fields. So I think some people then discount rollup fields and say, no, you can't use a rollup field in a workflow. And that's just not true at all. It's just it can't trigger it.
Right.
And so what I find myself doing in that kind of thing, actually use rollup fields and workflows often. You just have to find something else that would have changed at the same time. Or or sometimes I've had a timeout where it runs fairly often and then it just checks the value of the rollup field and then makes decisions based on what the result is. One of my favorite ones to do now that we have synchronous workflows, I really love the error messages you can do with synchronous workflows.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a really easy hack. You just cancel the workflow and then you put in a message. So that pops up to the user, and it can be dynamic, which is kind of fun. We might have to talk about that in another episode.
Yeah.
But what I have done before, like I had this for a client where they needed to put in, it was shipping related, and they needed to make sure they ordered at least one item before continuing on. Sometimes the users would forget to go in and add something. And so even though it wasn't instantaneous, it was still really helpful to have the user have to run the roll-up, and the roll-up counted how many child records there were. And if there was at least one, the workflow would let them continue. If there wasn't, if it was nothing or zero, then a pop-up message would go tell the user, nope, go refresh the roll-up. And or there has to be a record. So refresh the roll-up and then make sure you add something. So it was a nice way of, even though it wasn't instantaneous, still locking in that process and letting the workflow support. Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, very cool. A couple other considerations that come to mind in working with roll-ups. You can't roll up a roll-up, so don't try it. You only get one level of rolling up these type of fields. Yeah,
and you can kind of roll up calculated fields, kind of, sort of, sometimes, maybe, not always. No. It's a little complicated in that way. I mean, you can roll up. I mean, how would you best explain it? I mean, it's a simple calculated, but you can get kind of nesting in your calculated logic. And we run out of runway really fast if we want to bring in a roll-up field and have them collaborate.
Right. And those, I think as we start getting into, kind of back to Bernie's question, as we look at alternatives, we'll see kind of if you do find yourself in that situation of running out of runway, what can you do? What are some of those good alternatives?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So just to revisit his question, is there a way to some child entity fields without using a roll-up field? Some calculation needs to be immediately done. So a couple of assumptions that I have as I'm hearing these kind of requirements is that the up to an hour wait time is too long. Immediately is not necessarily a specific discrete amount of time, but it means pretty dang quick, and it's probably important for the user to have it right back in front of them. But I do assume that the user clicking the update button is not an acceptable approach, because you can kind of manually force the refreshing of a roll-up field to calculate for that specific instance of it. But, if that's not a user experience that you can put forward for the solution that you're putting out there, I mean, I'm just making the assumption that that's not an option in this case.
Mm-hmm. Whenever we get into situations like this, it becomes a matter of priorities. So sometimes the priority is the roll-up. Sometimes it is the immediacy. Sometimes it is something else to do with the user experience. A lot of times it is budget. And so all different things come in. And so, I mean, there's the classic question, but couldn't you just do that in code? And the answer is always yes, but often it's not actually what we go with, because that's not the right choice for budget or for upgrades or for some other scenario. So let's talk through what, depending on your budget. I mean, I guess there's the obvious, if you have the budget to write all the plugins in the world, and you can be smart about that and follow best practices, then sure, you can absolutely do this in a plugin. But
yeah, well, I mean, I guess you could do it in a plugin, and depending on kind of when and where it's happening, you could use client-side scripting as well. So there could be kind of JavaScript involved in going and doing that.
Yeah, I think something to keep in mind with those, sometimes where people get into trouble, is they'll use something client-side and not realize that the user never opens that record, so it's never actually going to fire. I had client-side scripting once I found early in my career that was supposed to update current age, but unless you opened the contact record on the contact's birthday, it wasn't accurate.
Yeah.
So you got to make sure, if you're going to use something client-side, that in all cases the user actually has that record open. If you're updating these values behind the scenes and it's not running, you can really get into trouble there.
Yeah, you really can. Though, some things that, though these don't really apply for doing a roll-up, business rules inside of Dynamics have started to give an alternative to some JavaScript, and business rules, depending on the scope that you have associated with them, will run server-side even if someone's not physically in the record. So I've seen more and more of that coming into the platform, but I guess, just for Bernie's question of rolling up in particular, that's not really going to apply in this situation.
Yeah, we're not going to be able to roll up in a business role. In really, really simple scenarios, I used to use workflows for that. I've moved away from it, but I used to use I would increment a value on a parent record based on things that happen on the child. And that can get it done in some really specific circumstances.
Yeah.
I actually had something this week that I was very, very sure I could do in a roll-up field, and it didn't work, and I ended up going back to goals for it, which in this case, it did not have to be instantaneous. So that helped. But what I needed is I needed the value of some child records for that current week. So it was a rolling last 7 days, and I tried every date-related hack I could think of with calculating roll-up fields and couldn't get there. Workflows, anything. And kept thinking that logically I was one step away, and then I get all the way through building it, and it wasn't there. And so ended up doing things in a goal. And in this case, it worked for us because it did not have to be instantaneous. It was okay to have that lag. And goals are worse in the sense that that's a day instead of an hour.
Right.
So we're getting even further from that instantaneous part of it, but it comes down to priority. And in this case, the priority was last 7 days. The priority was not instant.
Got it.
Have you done anything with workflows recalculating a roll-up?
So I certainly have. I mean, you mentioned the kind of based on the child record, having something happen, having something done there, going and updating the parent record, incrementing by 1 if it's a count, or adding the dollar value of an opportunity for that kind of thing. It can be really good, but where that can fall down is, let's say for some reason that workflow is disabled when some records are imported. All of a sudden, your total value gets out of sync, and you have to somehow true that up to what it had been, which ends up being usually some other sort of process, whether export import or going in and kind of manually going after that. It's not as elegant of a solution there. But there are different options with custom workflow activities that have been created kind of out in the community to be able to solve these types of problems. And that's whether it's kind of looking at related records and trying to roll up totals into an existing field, a kind of a simple field in that way, or whether that's having a custom workflow activity that could go and do that work that you would otherwise do in code to manually force that roll-up field to refresh. So you could have it on the update of your opportunity record at that point, some other field, because you can't trigger it based off of the roll-up field, but some other similar field, have it go and manually hit that refresh button in the background.
Yeah, especially if you are impacting the underlying data with a workflow. You're already running a workflow. You're already the change is happening because you're forcing it in automation. So there's no reason why you can't run up and hit that refresh in the background. And that can be a nice way to do things if it's kind of multi-purpose code at that point. Because I don't need then a developer to write every single roll-up field or write a replacement for every roll-up field I need. I just need that little bit of an assist, and then I can do the rest of it myself. Yeah,
and there are a lot of great places to get that. We'll certainly include a link to a couple of relevant samples there. Definitely be smart for your organization, as we've talked about beforehand. Anytime you're using kind of a community tool like that, there are certain things that you just want to be mindful of as you carry forward, and making sure it's in compliance with everything you're doing. Whereas if you're developing in-house or working with a partner, you can put it through some of the kind of review standards that you have that may not be out there in a community project. So just keep that kind of thing in mind if you start going down that path.
And no matter what you do, make sure you document, especially in something like this. And I don't just mean technical documentation so your developer can remember what they wrote, but I mean really, really visible user documentation. Because something that's really risky is when a user misunderstands what the data is, and then they look at that and they say, well, no, I know it's 7, not 5. And then they start to discredit CRM and the value of that data and the value of what the system's providing, when really that's, they have it wrong. They're misunderstanding, they don't understand that inactive records shouldn't be counted here or something else.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really important to write out in a very user-friendly way what is actually being counted, what isn't being counted, and some basic troubleshooting understanding. Whether you write this in code, use a calculated field, use a goal or something else, you don't want them to have to go in and try to understand Rollup Fields to understand why their data doesn't seem right to them.
Yeah.
So it's really important in user training. You might even just do that in your description field. I mean, if you do that in the description field on the Rollup, then it's just a tooltip, and it doesn't have to be a big deal. You don't have to take out a billboard or something, but just make sure that that it's clear and people can find that if they need it.
All right. Well, with that, I think we can wrap things up here. Once again, would like to thank you, Bernie, for writing in with your question. Hope this has been thoughtful for you. This is certainly fun for me, as I hope it was for you, Britta.
Mm-hmm. It was. If anybody else wants to send us a question, we love questions from the audience. So please, you can find us on our website, implementthis.org, or find us on Twitter, or track. Matt and I are both pretty easy to find too, so you can track us down that
LinkedIn,
way.
I don't know, whatever.
Yeah.
All right. Without anything else, have a good one. You've been listening to Implement This with Britta Rexted and Matthew C. Anderson. Do you have a business problem you'd like us to discuss on the show? Reach us through our website, implementthis.org, where you can also subscribe to the podcast. We're on Twitter too. Britta is at MacGyverCRM, and I'm at MC Anderson. Thanks so much for listening.